I wonder what my next guest feels about this. She is former MEP, former Tory Cabinet Minister, of course, Ann Widdecombe. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you.
Your feelings about this? I mean, I think it's extraordinary that the Financial Conduct Authority, the sort of city watchdog, has investigated this situation that hit the headlines when Nigel Farage revealed he was being cancelled bank-wise for his political views. It's extraordinary that they've concluded that this is not happening. Well, it actually did happen to Nigel Farage, and there are many other people who will tell you it happened to them. And the most egregious and ridiculous example was that the granddaughter of Margaret Thatcher's former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nigel Lawson, had her bank details questioned. I think she had her account temporarily closed, and she's got Down syndrome. Now, this... The fact the FCA say it's not happening is sort of Kafkaesque. It's bizarre, isn't it?
Yes, let's make a distinction here between being debanked for political views and being debanked because you're a politically exposed person and the banks just think it's far too much faff to look after you. They're different. And Nigel was quite clearly, I mean, the emails were published. You know, we saw the emails that were exchanged within Coutts that clearly said that his values did not align with theirs. He was debanked because of his political views. And if the FCA say this doesn't happen, then how do they explain those emails? How do they explain the experience of the Halifax customer, who I think was a Church of England vicar, who objected when the entire bank was festooned with pride or whatever it was, and immediately he had his account closed because he had dared to express a contrary view. This is the financial sector answer to no platforming is what they do. They debank instead. So the FCA, frankly, has just made a complete fool of itself. We should all be laughing at them if it weren't so serious, because if they can't conclude a little investigation like that when all the evidence is actually stacked up and visible for all to see, then how do they handle the more complicated, obscure stuff? Yeah. How do they do it?
Exactly, and perhaps the FCA would like to give us their theories on why the chief executive of Coutts, Dame Alison Gray, had to step down from her job. I'll tell you why. I mean, partly it was because she was indiscreet about Nigel Farage's personal finances to a BBC journalist. But more than that, it's because she had to admit that his account, contrary to what she said originally, that his account was closed down for political reasons because his views did not align with her bank's values. So what the FCA could perhaps explain to us why they think she stepped down.
Well, they will say she stepped down because she broke client confidentiality, which she patently obviously did. I mean, under no circumstance should any official of any bank, however senior or however junior, be talking particularly to a BBC reporter about a client's confidential affairs. So the FCA know that, but they also, as I say, they know from the email evidence that was provided that Nigel was debanked quite specifically because of his political views. It's there in black and white. How can the FCA ignore that? I don't get it.
Yeah, well, it's sort of staring truth in the face and then lying, basically, it seems to me. And when you talk about politically exposed people, I'm sure that there are occasions when the closing of those accounts might be justified. But I think that is just language to disguise the fact that banks are taking decisions about their customers, about their politics. Now, in fairness, it did happen to Gina Miller, the well-known Remainer obsessive. So it does happen on both sides of the fence. But you and I, Anne, know full well that mostly it happens to right-wing people.
Yes, as I say, there is a difference between being debanked for your political views and for a bank saying, oh, we just can't bear to go through these procedures. But big thing here, where did those procedures come from? They came from the EU. So presumably, as we no longer belong to the EU, we're entitled to make it very much easier for banks to deal with politically exposed people without all the bureaucracy involved. So, you know, what is the problem there? Why haven't people acted on that? It's almost got buried in all the discussion. But these were EU rules which governed how banks had to take care of politically exposed people. Well, we can change that now.
We can, and Nigel Farage also calls for a similar system that they have in Germany, where every citizen has the legal right to a bank account. So in other words, no one can be in a situation where they can't have a bank. So he says that we should have that here. Normally I would think, well, do we really need that kind of law? But given the behaviour of the banks in recent months, surely it's not a bad idea, is it?
Yeah, I think your problem there is if you've got somebody who is actually fraudulent and they're using their account for money laundering, you've got to allow the banks to close down that account. But I think that the basic right to a personal bank account must surely just be a requirement of everyday living. I don't understand. There are people without bank accounts. I don't understand how they manage. I don't understand how they pay their bills, how they carry out transactions in this day and age. Yeah, once it was perfectly possible, you put your cash under the mattress or in a biscuit tin, but it's not possible now. Yeah,
the age of the biscuit tin is over, as Nigel says. When you get your bank accounts cancelled, you effectively become a non-person. Yeah. There's nothing you can do, literally. Now, you mentioned the EU earlier, Anne, and I'm glad you did. I wanted to get your thoughts on Keir Starmer's summit in Paris yesterday with Emmanuel Macron, the French president, whereby, you know, he makes no bones about it. He's cozying up to the EU. He wants much closer ties to Europe. And with a sickening inevitability, we learned today that guess who brokered that meeting? It was good old Sir Tony Blair. Can't we persuade him to retire?
Well, I wish somebody would persuade him to retire, and I wish he would stop seeing himself as some sort of great statesman when all he's actually doing in this case is flying in the face of the will of the British people, which was very clearly expressed in a referendum. Now, Blair didn't want to leave, Starmer didn't want to leave. You know, they are committed to the EU. And my big fear is, no, we won't ever rejoin formally because that would be too costly. And we won't ever actually do that. But there, as I've said before, there are two ways of rejoining Europe. Yeah. One is formally and one is informally. And this guy is going to try all he can do, to the extent even of accepting free movement, which is one of the reasons why we voted for Brexit. He's going to try all he can do, I'm talking about Starmer now, not Blair, all he can do to get us effectively, if not legally, in the EU.
Absolutely. And my theory on Keir Starmer, what I find bewildering is that he thinks him flying to The Hague and saying, oh, let's do a deal on the migrants with the EU, go to Paris, oh, let's get ever closer to Europe, let's get back into the fold. I'm bewildered by why he thinks that is what the British people want, why he thinks that's what we voted for. I suspect it's this, that he is so steeped in his own culture, spends all of his time talking to his Remainiac shadow cabinet, that he thinks that their obsessive Europhilism is reflective of the people of this country. Well, it isn't, I don't think.
Well, it's exactly the same mistake that Cameron made right back at the time of the referendum. He was so sure that everybody thought like the metropolitan elite and that everybody thought like he did. He was so sure of that he actually nailed his colours firmly to the mast of one side of the referendum, which he should never have done. He had to resign as a result. And I think it's all part of the same culture, and Starmer is also part of that culture. And as I say, it's flying in the face of what the people voted for. But ask yourself this. Why do we need to go back in? Our exports to Europe are actually up, but I don't just mean up on pre-COVID, I mean up on long before that up from when we were members of the EU. Why do we need to go back in? We don't.
Yeah, we're not doing so bad. I mean, people say we are, but we're doing a lot better than Germany, which is in recession. We're doing arguably better than France, Spain, Italy. We're doing OK. And I agree with you, Anne. There's no reason to cosy up to the EU. We don't need them anymore. And that's why we voted to leave, because we don't want to need the EU. Keir Starmer is on the wrong track here. Anne, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. Ann Widdecombe there, former MEP, former Tory Cabinet Minister, of course, as well.